Hola, clase. Hoy vamos a revisar los verbos tener y ir. Ellos son verbos muy comunes. Necesitamos usarlos en muchas expresiones. Primero, vamos a revisar el verbo tener. Tener is used in a lot of expressions, so it's really important to know how to conjugate it and then to know how to use it in a sentence. So I'll show you the conjugations and then we'll look at a couple different ways that you can use tener in your sentences. Tener is a mixed irregular verb, and I'll show you what I mean by that in the next slide. Here, you can see why tener is considered a mixed irregular verb. When you conjugate tener, you end up with tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, and tienen. So you can see that tener is a go verb because in the yo form, we say yo tengo. You can also see that tener is a stem changer because we change the E to an IE in three of the forms, in the tú, the él, ella, usted, and then the ellos, ellas, ustedes forms. So we end up with tienes, tiene, and tienen. Now remember that stem changers do not change in the nosotros form. So that's why we don't change the E to an IE in the nosotros form. We just keep it as tenemos. Now, if you don't remember what a go verb is or what a stem changer is, that's okay because we're going to review both of those different types of irregular verbs in a future lesson. For now, you'll just want to memorize the conjugations for tener and remember that it's a mixed verb, a mixed irregular verb, because it is a go verb and it's also a stem changer. One thing that I also want to point out is that the endings for the verb tener are actually regular. So if you look at the O, the ES, the E, the amos, and the EN, those are all regular endings that you would usually put on an ER verb. So you don't really have to memorize any new endings. You just have to memorize that tener is a go verb and that it's a stem changer. So you have to add the G and you have to change the E to an IE in all of the forms except the yo form and the nosotros form. Like I said, tener is a very common verb, so there's a ton of different ways that we can use it in Spanish. The two main ways that we use tener in Spanish is to talk about things that we have, including our possessions and our age. So you can see there's some examples here. Mi amigo tiene dos perros. We would translate that as my friend has two dogs. Yo tengo ojos azules. I have blue eyes. Or la ciudad tiene dos torres. So the city has two towers. You can see here that we're using tener the same way as we would use to have in English. The next three examples show how we talk about age in Spanish, which is very different than the way that we talk about age in English. So when we talk about age in English, we use the verb to be because we say, I am so many years old, or you are so many years old. But in Spanish, we don't say that. We say, I have this many years, or you have this many years. So in Spanish, we use the verb tener, which means to have, to express how old we are. So we have el chico tiene 5 años. The boy has 5 years. Sus primos tienen 14 años. Your cousins have 14 years. Or tú tienes 50 años. You have 50 years. When we translate it to English, then we could still say the boy is 5 years old, right? We don't want to say the boy has 5 years in English because that will sound strange. But in Spanish, they really are saying to have and not to be. All right, so next we're going to talk about the verb ir, which means to go. Ir is a very popular verb in Spanish because we can use it to talk about places that we go And we can also use it to talk about things that we are going to do. Ir is a total irregular verb, so it doesn't follow any of the normal rules that we use when we're conjugating our regular verbs in the present tense. Here's the conjugations for the verb ir. You should know these really well. If you do not know these, then you should write them down a couple times on a piece of notebook paper and practice them so that you can make sure you have them etched into your memory. You'll be using them a lot. And like I said, these are verbs. This is a verb that you should have already learned last year and that you should have memorized. So the conjugations of ir are voy, vas, va, vamos, van. So, like I said, we can use the verb ir to talk about places that we like to go. So, when we're talking about a place that we like to go that is a feminine noun, like my examples here, la biblioteca or la casa, we are going to set our sentence up like I have in these two examples. So, the first one here, voy a la biblioteca. Voy is I go, a is to, la is the, and biblioteca is library. So something just to remember is we always have to have the a, okay? And then the la as well. So to the. You don't ever want to forget those two little words. You don't want to just say voy biblioteca. That would just be like I go library. So you need those two little connecting words. And that next example, tu padre va a la casa. Your father goes to the house. So again, it's just really important that we have that a in the la, okay? Because that means to the. So those are like our little connecting words that make our sentence make sense. Now, when we're talking about a masculine noun, a place that we're going to that's a masculine noun, we're just gonna make one slight change. So that first example that I have for you is nosotros vamos al cine, okay? So this sentence is saying we go to the theater. Now notice that instead of having two words like a, l, which would be to the, we sandwich these two words together and we end up with al, okay? So this is how you form a contraction in Spanish. We're used to using contractions, right? Like instead of saying do not in English, we do don't, right? We sandwich those two words together. It's just that in English, we add an apostrophe, right? In Spanish, we don't have to add an apostrophe. The next example here, Pepe y Lupe. So Pepe and Lupe van, go, al, so to the hospital. Pepe y Lupe van al hospital. Pepe and Lupe go to the hospital. So we have not forgot our two really important words, which are to the. We have just put them together. Al has become al. The other way that we can use the verb ir is to talk about things that we are going to do in the future. You should be familiar with this from last year. So I have some examples for you. Mi amiga va a jugar fútbol. So got my friend is going to play football. Okay. And notice again, like the last example, we need our little connecting word, okay, which is to. We don't want to just say mi amiga va jugar fútbol, because that would just be my friend is going play football. And that just kind of sounds a little bit weird, right? We kind of cut out an important word there. And then you'll also notice that when we have our verb phrase there, va a jugar, we actually have two verbs there. We have the verb to go, and we also have the verb to play. So we only have to conjugate our first verb. So we conjugate ear to va, but our second verb, jugar, we don't have to conjugate, okay? So you'll want to always remember that. Your second verb, you just leave it alone. So you don't have to change jugar to juega or anything else to match the person. In the next example, en la tarde voy a estudiar. So in the afternoon, I am going to study. And again, the second verb, estudiar, doesn't need to get conjugated. Only the first verb, voy, gets conjugated, okay? And it matches the person, the subject of the sentence. So I, yo, and that's our sentence. The last example here, Liz va a caminar en el parque. So Liz is going to walk in the park, okay? And this whole phrase, va a caminar, is considered to be our verb phrase, okay? So we have two verbs that are working together to tell us what the action is that's happening in this sentence. I want to do just a couple example translations with you. I'll kind of pause, and let you see if you can fill in the blanks before I do, okay? But see if you can translate this sentence with me. So I am going to this school. We know that our subject is I, which in Spanish, that's what? It's yo, right? And then am going. So we're going to be conjugating the verb ear, and we need it to match yo. So yo voy, okay? We don't want to forget our two little words to the. Now we need to think about the school though, right? And what kind of a noun it is, whether it's a masculine noun or a feminine noun. So hopefully you remember that escuela is feminine, right? La escuela. So all you have to do then is just add the a, which is to. So yo voy a la escuela. For this next example here, we have you are going to the bank. So we've got a new subject here, you. What is that? To. Okay. Are. So we need to change the verb ir to match to. So to vas. Okay. We want to go ahead and look at the bank and figure out what it is. So hopefully you remember. You remember banco. Okay. Is that a feminine or masculine noun? You can look at the O, and in this case, you would be right if you take a guess that it is masculine. Okay, so banco goes in that last blank. And remember that we're going to want to change to a. We don't want to forget our little word. So we don't want to write a-l though, right? We want to make it a contraction. We want to just put the a and the L together. So tú vas al banco. You are going to the bank. All right, in this next example, we're talking about something that we are going to do in the future. So we've got we, which is nosotros. I'm not going to go ahead and write our subject because if you remember in Spanish, we don't always have to write our subject, but our subject is nosotros. So then when we look at our going, we know that we're going to be using the verb ir. And in order to match the verb ir to our subject nosotros, we would change it to vamos. Okay. We want to say to, it's a. And we want to say eat, which is the verb comer. And remember that we don't have to conjugate our second verb. So vamos a comer, or we could say nosotros vamos a comer. Okay, and this is the last example I have for you. So we have he is going to write. He in Spanish is él. We don't necessarily have to write that down here, but we can if we want to. Is going, so we're going to conjugate our verb ir to match él. So él va. For to, it's a. And then for write, it's escribir. Escribir. We don't have to conjugate our first verb. We conjugate our first verb. We don't have to conjugate our second verb. we conjugated our first verb, va, right? So our second verb, escribir, just gets left alone. We don't have to do anything to it. So we have va a escribir or él va a escribir. That's all I have for you. I'll see you guys in class.